Welcome to the Women and Wealth podcast with Esther Sabo. Esther is a respected leader in the field of personal financial advice with over 25 years of experience. After going through her own significant and challenging life-changing events, she overcame fear and self-doubt to launch her own successful advisory firm. Now Esther is ready to share her practical and personal experiences to help other women clear their hurdles and brave life's transitions. In this way, she inspires women to lead fulfilling and confident lives.
Hello and welcome to Women in Wealth with Esther Sabo from Gates Pass Advisors. I'm very excited. I'm glad you're joining us today. This is going to be a part 2. Esther brought a guest back to the show for a lot more information, and that is Alison Salisbury. Esther, good morning. How are you?
Hi, Eric. I'm doing well. I know we talked earlier off recording about the warm weather we're having in California, which is nice and pleasant, but it's not very good because it doesn't rain, and we need that rain because we're in such drought conditions. So I'm sorry to have upset you before, but it is quite pleasant here. How are you?
That's fantastic. If I could box up the 6 inches of snow and ice that are on my porch right now and send them to you so you have some
precipitation.
Yes. Something I'd be more than happy to. Oh my
Honestly,
goodness.
Most people in your position would go, yeah, keep it with you, but we'll take it. We'll take it all. It's really serious out here. I
bet. Well, I'll cross my fingers for a nice 75-degree day with rain for you. How about that?
Okay.
Because at least it's warm, right? Something like that. All right. Well, you brought Alison back to the show. What are you guys talking about today?
What we're talking about today are a number of things that are all about navigating the world of personal spending. We're going to talk about budgeting, launching 2021 with a good budget. And oh my goodness, people might cringe with that, but so many people want to start off a new year like, I want to have a good handle on this. And we're going to talk about COVID and a couple other things around fraud and cybersecurity. So good morning, Alison. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Esther. Thank you so much for having me on again. I had so much fun on the first episode and looking forward to this one. How are you?
Oh, we're great. It was so fun to talk with you last time. I felt like we could go on forever, and I'm really glad we can continue on this morning. So thank you so much. We didn't get a time to do it too much in the first one, but can you share a bit about launching a new year with a new budget for clarity?
Sure, absolutely. Last year was tough, as we all know. I mean, that's probably the understatement of the year. And in terms of budgeting, I think it's really important that we look back at last year and see how we responded and in some cases reacted to what COVID threw at us. I think there's two types of responses to COVID. There are the people that weren't really affected financially by COVID. They did not lose their jobs. They continued to work differently for the most part, but they maintained their financial situation, pretty nicely. And I would say that that's probably true for a lot of retirees as well. So, they had enough money that they really had very little impact financially. And then there's the people that were furloughed or laid off, and COVID had a huge effect on them. And consequently, or finances really were really drastically changed. And so I want to talk a little bit about both of those people. I'll weave them in as we kind of talk a little bit about budgeting. But, the most important thing in my client work is we look back at 2020 and look at month by month income and expense over the course of the year. And you can see, in March and April and May, things really changed for everybody, whether people had financial security or not. And one of the biggest things is for people who were able to continue working, what changed for them was, for the most part, they were working remotely. So a lot of changes in how they spent. So, for example, commuting was non-existent for many people. Kids were at home now, and so there's a lot of childcare type expenses that suddenly dropped way down. Groceries soared, as you can imagine. Everybody's hoarding toilet paper and all that kind of thing, household supplies. Medical supplies, people were hoarding masks and disinfectants and all that kind of thing. So those costs really soared. Utilities went up because people were home all the time. But other costs went down. People weren't dining out. And for a long time, a number of weeks, people hadn't figured out that they could have all their restaurant meals delivered. Restaurants hadn't really pivoted at that point. And so that's why groceries went way up, but dining out went way down for a few weeks. And travel just disappeared. It just disappeared. Nobody traveled. And that was true for everybody. And then for people that were furloughed or laid off, obviously income really changed. And so we saw savings account balances start to go down. We saw dips into retirement funds, that kind of thing. And people in 2021, we need to start thinking about how are we going to recover from that kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways of managing these things emotionally. I have one client, a couple that they're both in the hospitality industry, and of course they were furloughed, and they had been thinking about selling their house in the East Bay and decided that this was the time to do it. They're furloughed indefinitely, and so they sold their house, they bought an RV, and they traveled all over the country. It was a lifelong dream that they had had. So, this is one case where these folks were able to turn what for many people is, a pretty devastating experience into a dream come true. A lot of it for them, it was a mindset thing. They just thought, we can stay here and try to make our, monthly mortgage payment and the property taxes and all that kind of thing, and, get into a really negative space, or we can just completely change our situation. And, that took a lot of courage, but that's what they did. Right. So
I think also that one of the benefits of the service that you provide and people being clear is that when the bad times happen, that there is the COVID has been so hard. I just think of all the shopkeepers. I know you do too. All the restaurants, all the people who work in leisure, entertainment, and how they just don't have customers. And it just makes it, I am not going to be Pollyanna about it. It's very, very difficult. And I know you're not either, Alison. But at least taking something and going, okay, this is our really awful situation. Where do we go from here? And that's what you're sharing in this couple's situation, is that they knew what they were up against in terms of their non-discretionary spending.
Right.
That they could take discretion over what choices they wanted to make.
Well, and their example is a bit extreme, but I use that because it is a good example of how we can take a very difficult situation and turn it around into something that's more positive. Some of my clients, many of my clients actually, who have children, at first having their kids home was just brutal because they thought that they could transition their work from going out to their office to remote, and that they would still be able to do a 9-to-5 kind of thing. Well, that just doesn't happen with kids. It doesn't matter how old the kids are or how young they are. It just does not happen. When you have other family members in the home, your attention is distracted, and they need you for certain things at certain times of the day and that kind of thing. And so it's really, really difficult. And yet, if you can look at those, and so many of my clients have done this. It's like, what a gift that I get to spend this time with my child and turn it into a positive experience. And of course, that can lead to some changes in spending. And so, what I've seen is Online entertainment has gone up as far as movies and online games and that kind of thing. We see, but it's quality. It's kind of like it's a form of quality time, if you will.
It's one of the reasons that Netflix and Amazon both one of the top 5 performing stocks.
That's right,
and,
right?
Exactly. Huge returns. Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah, exactly. But sitting on the couch with my grandson and watching a favorite movie and they're reciting all the lines to me and everything. I mean, I'm really quite amazed at how much a 4-year-old can retain. And those are memories for me. But in any event, I think in terms of thinking about this coming year, we're all hopeful that at some point this year, we're going to return to some kind of normalcy. We just don't really know what that's going to mean. But, my thinking is that in terms of budget, I think it's important for us to consider things like how has COVID affected different industries. So groceries, for example, shipping has become more expensive, so the cost of groceries is higher. And I think that even when we return back to normal, I don't see the cost of groceries actually going down. I think that that's going to remain high. So I think when we start crafting our 2021 budgets, I think it's important for us to just be very thoughtful about each of these categories and think about, are we really going to go back to pre-pandemic spending levels, or, are things going to change? Now, in some cases, things will come down a little, I think, and other things are going to go up. One of the things, like with childcare, I was reading an article the other day. I'm kind of addicted to personal finance articles, so I'm not an expert by any means, but I do read a lot about these things. But one prediction is that because a lot of childcare facilities have had to close, there's going to be a shortage of childcare agencies, which means that fees will be higher. And so when we're planning our 2021 budget, we want to send our kids back to after-school programs and that kind of thing. You can expect that you'll probably end up paying a little bit more, and the competition of getting your child in is going to be higher. So, you may want to make a decision that I'm going to do a combination of working at my office and working remotely so that I can be home for my child after school, because we can't, we're not going to do the after school program. It's too expensive, that kind of thing. So there's just, I think, going to be a lot of opportunity for exploring lots of different options. I don't think that many of us are just going to automatically go back to the way things were. I think it's going to take a while before we get there.
Well, it's just like if we look at 9/11 and how things shifted after that. And at first it seemed really crazy to take off our shoes and belts, which it kind of can still feel like, oh my goodness, but it spawned some different industries like clear, etc.
Sure.
And now we kind of do it without thinking about it. But those types of things, we're not sure yet. I really appreciate those examples of what you've read and seen. I know also for budgeting, you have an interesting way, or a simple way, to lay out for people how much to allocate to different types of expenditures. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I just love this method of budgeting. And the way I discovered it was in a book that was written by Elizabeth Warren and her daughter a little over 10 years ago. And this is not a political endorsement at all, but this happens to be such a great book. It's very simple read, and I actually send it to all my clients. It's called All Your Worth. What the authors have come up with is a budget that's actually pretty popular now in the personal finance world, and it's called the 50-20-30 budget. And what's so great about it is that it's not rigid, and it allows people to really kind of move around within that budget. So the way it works is that you take your after-tax income and you allocate 50% of it to what are called your necessary or your must-have expenses. And those are what you need to survive. So basic things like shelter, food, health insurance, and basic food too, not going out to fancy restaurants and that kind of thing, but clothing, the kind of things that you would need to have in order to survive. That if you did not have these things in your life, you might die. Utilities like Eric absolutely has to have the heater on, right? Or he could freeze to death, right? That's a must-have. Anyway, yeah. So 20% of the after-tax income then would be allocated to paying down debt and savings. And that leaves 30%, which is a lot for many people. 30% is discretionary or your wants. And one of the conversations I have quite a lot with clients is pets, our cats, our dogs, our beloved fur babies. And, I know we would all think that we would just die if we didn't have our fur babies. But the truth of the matter is you really wouldn't die. And if you could not pay for them, you would make sure that they went to a good home. You would. I mean, you just would. So you have to think of them as a want. And people with kids,
And I'm actually going to stop you before you go to the kids. Sorry to interrupt, but I just know too, because I have these conversations, people are thinking of getting a dog or a pet, and I love I have 2 4-legged kids here at my home. And I always say, it's the food is not inexpensive.
Right.
And what is even the most expensive is the vetting. And
That's right.
vets can do amazing things now. They can do incredible things for animals. And it's the same issue as you take them in and it's like, oh my gosh, cleaning their teeth, which is very important for their survival. But that will set you back $1,000 easily.
Easy.
Yeah. And so that is something I caution people about. Just really, you have to allocate. And I will throw into a spending plan, maybe it's easily $1,000 to $2,000 a year. It can be, depending on how many animals you have. And then you pop in vetting on top of that. And so I have been in that place. I have thought, I'll never spend blah, blah, blah that this client spent on their thing. And I've been in the exact same place in a very vulnerable time in my life where I was like, no, this animal cannot die. It cannot. And I have spent exorbitant amounts on an animal because it was so painful to think about the alternative, but it gets very expensive. So it does. Relate.
It does. And, and on a side note to that, we're big advocates of encouraging the purchase of pet insurance. I have pet insurance on my 2 cats, and I have to tell you, every year we end up submitting some kind of a claim that pays for the premium. So particularly if you have an animal that goes outside, which we don't, but many people do. And pet insurance really can save your budget for sure.
Good. Okay, now you can talk about the 2-legged children.
Yeah, we'll go. Yeah, there we go.
But that's really good to know about the pet insurance. It's a question that I often get asked as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the cost of kids, yes, there are some must-haves there. They need to be fed, they need to be clothed, you need to pay for insurance and, that kind of thing. But there are things that are wants. Tutors is a good one. We all want our kids to do well in school and go to the top colleges and all that kind of thing. I have clients that will pay thousands upon thousands of dollars to hire the best tutors, the best college counselors for admissions and all that kind of thing to ensure that their child goes to an Ivy League school. I personally am an advocate of letting kids shine in their own best possible way, but I love community colleges. There are some outstanding community colleges out there, and so many kids, when my daughter was going to the first 2 years of college, so many of her friends came home from these Ivy League schools just totally overwhelmed, burnt out, kind of thing. And they ended up going to the local community college for 2 years. I remember when my child went to that local community college, and she burst in the kitchen one day and she said, "Mom, Mom, did you know that our school is the leading theater school to Stanford University? You know, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, thank God. You know, probably saved us quite a pretty penny. But those are wants, you know, when you're sending your child to these things. Those are really wants. They're not needs. You will not die. Your child will not die if you're not making sure that they have these opportunities. They're great if you can do it, but if your budget won't allow it, you got to get real. And the thing that is so wonderful about the 50-20-30 budget is within each of those three categories, you can move everything around. If you want to spend 80% of that 50% on a mortgage and live in a place that's way too much for what your income is, that's your choice, you know, but that only leaves a certain amount for the rest of the must-haves. But you can make each of those three parts within that 50-20-30 budget. You make it yours, and you can wiggle around in there. However you want to spend the money in the 30%, that's up to you. You know, if all you want to do is go to spas, you know?
Right.
But don't spend more than 30% of your take-home pay.
And I love, if you're listening and you haven't heard, we talk a lot in the first podcast in this series on categorizing and getting clear and how to do that so that you know coming into this, what is your 50%? What could be your 30%?
Right.
So I do encourage you to go back and look at that. Before we switch over to another area that's so critical, which is people who scam and steal over the internet, anything else that you want to say budgeting for 2021 to help our listeners just get enthusiastic and willing to carry that all the way through?
Right. So in 2021, I think it's really, really important for those people that had to tap into their emergency funds. If there's one thing that 2020 taught us, it is that anything can happen. And, you know, we were so blindsided by the suddenness of the country literally shutting down. And this could happen again in a different form, you know, as if 2020 COVID wasn't bad enough. In my area, we were devastated by wildfires. So, you know, people lost their homes and they lost their cars. They lost everything. They lost all their clothing. And, you know, it was bad enough that people were losing jobs, but then they lost every material thing that they owned as well, you know. So if there's one thing I would say is you have to be prepared. And it takes time to build that emergency fund back up. But, you know, if you can just start small, but get with it and get steady, you know. We just don't know. We don't know what could happen. It's unimaginable, but the unimaginable happened, and there's no reason why it couldn't happen again. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's why it started when we started the podcast. It was like, please send precipitation over here to the west because it is still dry. It's colder, but it's still dry. And we need it. And I also appreciate that about those safety nets and the cash reserves being a key part of that. So thank you for that suggestion and recommendation as we're shifting to 2021. I mean, I know so many clients have said, well, you know, I'm not spending as much. Isn't it great? And it is, you know, in terms of portfolio and income management and all of that when we're looking at low interest rates and pulling from portfolios for sustainability to keep expenses low. And then the other thing is, okay, where does that money that didn't get spent, where does it go? You know, did it go to some other category? So it's just or sometimes it's to helping their children who did lose income. And it's so important to have the eyes on the ball, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, on all parts of the ball. It's easy to overlook certain things. And so having an accountability partner, whether it's somebody like me or somebody like you, or, you know, a family member, having somebody that is comfortable talking about these things with you, you know, and looking at the numbers and making sure you're not missing something.
Yep. Yeah, really clear. Really good suggestions. So we're going to, we could talk a whole other one about this, but the other issue I want to pivot to is around cybersecurity and what you and I have both seen, the preying on senior citizens who are smart, intelligent, retired professionals who get sucked into sending money where they shouldn't.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And don't we have a story about that? So
Yes.
there's a couple things that I want to talk about in this vein. So cybersecurity has to do with the protection of internet connected systems, which is our computers, our tablets, even our cell phones at times, but not always, smart TVs and smart appliances. I mean, there are refrigerators now that are tapped into the internet. People have alarm systems, all that kind of thing, right? And the protection of those devices is so critical. I mean, I know that, like Siri and, things like that. I know that they make life easier for a lot of people in some ways, but they also make life so much more complicated because your home internet, your home server, if you will, from your modem going out to all these things is open unless you've taken precautions and installed malware identifying programs and firewalls and all that kind of thing. And one of the examples I have of that is a client of mine who's she's in her 70s. She's pretty, she's a pretty savvy gal. And, she was on her laptop and using one of her 2 email addresses and conversing with people and whatnot. And all of a sudden, her screen just froze up and it started blaring the siren sound at her. And these flashing messages came up about, we've, locked your account or your computer is locked and we are IT people and we can fix this for you. And in order for us to do that, you need to send us money. And they told her literally to write a check and hold it up to her camera. The check wasn't for very much, it was like, I don't know, $600 or something like that. And incredibly, she did that. And the moment that she did it, she realized that somebody had an image of her checking account routing number and checking number. And she immediately closed her computer and went to the bank immediately. And thank God she did. And the bank, had to close the checking account. We had to open up a new one. And of course, that meant that we have to notify Social Security, the insurance companies, the utility company, all the auto pays that she had and the auto deposit. I mean, it was a bit of a project, right, to get her changed over. And of course, immediately I called my IT guy, who of course I think is one of the best on the planet, and he immediately went over to her house and took a look. And sure enough, there was some malware on there. He got it off. He scrubbed her hard drive and he installed all the protective software that she needs. So that somebody who is so intelligent, has run her own business, she's so sharp, and that in a moment of vulnerability and fear, she did something that in a normal conversation she would say, oh, there'd be no way I would do something like that. But to have the siren blaring and the flashing message, it unnerved her so much that she did something completely out of character. Fortunately, in this case, she acted quickly enough. She pulled herself together and acted quickly enough. Now, the other side of things is, and that is cybersecurity, and that's protecting your devices, if you will. But then there's protecting yourself, okay? And that's where identity theft, financial scams, fraud, the preying of on vulnerable seniors, elder financial fraud, that kind of thing. And that's, you and I have a pretty compelling case on that one too. And this is where internet connected systems are not involved so much as the trust and the vulnerability of this very old school, if you will, population. Esther, I have to say, I think, you and I were raised a little bit in this kind of a climate where we were brought up to be nice, to be polite, and we don't want to ruffle feathers. We don't want to be disrespectful of anybody, really. And that was so ingrained in us that we're vulnerable, and people will take advantage of that, and the people that take advantage of that are absolute masters at this. They should have PhDs in psychology, and maybe some of them do, I don't know, but they sure know how to prey on people's niceness and their fears, and they yeah, go ahead.
I know too, like when we have a case that we shared of a senior woman who was approached over the phone and the internet with a publisher's clearinghouse scam.
Yes.
And again, smart individual, and basically
Very
from the
smart.
generation that taught us to be polite. And
Correct.
I brought you into that case because they needed to have someone else on board between them and their check writing as a result.
Right. So we just provide an extra set of eyes and ears, basically, in a case like that. But, the shame and remember we tried to get her to report this case. There's so many cases that are not reported, and the reason why they're not reported is because of the embarrassment factor. Oh my God, I got taken in, and for this amount of money, and this was a significant amount of money. I mean, six figures.
That's how I even knew about it, because I said I contacted them and said, what are these checks for? We have not talked about, because I do monitor the checks and going out. Not that I'm so fascinated with where people are spending their money, but for exactly things like this. Wait a minute, Why is this money leaving the account? And they at first didn't want to talk about it, and then they were. And I know you and I have both, and I've had clients whose parents were taken in by, I have your grandchild. Your grandchild is in jail. Right.
And, I had a client once who's passed on now, but she was in her 90s at the time. She was quite a crusty gal, and she got one of those calls, and she just said, well, rot's a ruck, and hung up the phone.
What did she say?
Rot's a ruck. Lots of luck.
Oh, rot's. Oh, okay, got it. Thank you.
But in any event, I thought, oh my God, if only everybody could be like that, right? So, oh dear.
Yeah,
anyway.
I appreciated what you told this client on the Publishers Clearinghouse thing. You really were encouraging them, don't take the calls. Hang up. It is okay to hang up. It is okay to ignore. And and we did. At first, they didn't want to place a report. And we know that placing a police report, I placed it with them, is not going to catch the people, because they'll just form another identity. But what was most indicative of that was just the amount of shame. We won't talk about this. And I appreciate so much your approach with this person and other clients, and how say, this happens. They make it look so real. Yes. On the internet or on the phone.
I even received a check once. I received a check in the mail. I'm trying to remember. This was such a long time ago. I think I got a check in the mail, a paper check. It looked so real, and it was for a certain amount of money. It was because I won a sweepstakes, and this was just the first installment, right? So it was a check for like $1,200 or something like that. And I was to deposit the money and then pay them a fee, okay? And I thought, this check cannot be real. So I actually took it to the bank, and I said, does this check look real to you? And, they looked at it and they said, well, it looks pretty real to us, Mm-hmm. And even the bank was fooled, right? So what we did was we opened up a separate checking account. We deposited it. And then I kept getting these calls. We need you to write us a check. Send us a fee. Send us the fee. Send us the fee. Well, I did. I wrote a check on that, and of course, their check bounced, and of course, my check. But I was, I kept thinking, and they tell you this: if you think it's too good to be true, believe me, it is. It is definitely too good to be true.
And absolutely, I just want to score that. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And let somebody know. So many times people just feel like this is very real. And I bet everyone listening to this knows of a situation. So it's one of the reasons why to have other parties on with you who you do trust to be another set of eyes. And that is one of the services that's very critical of what you offer and I hope what we offer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one other that, especially during COVID, so many people are isolated. Yes. And they are so lonely. They're so lonely. Yeah. And scammers are really, not identity theft so much, but scammers are really preying on this vulnerable, lonely population. And this what happened years ago is actually to a friend of mine, a woman also in her 70s at the time. But I'm reading that this is actually happening now very, very much. And that is where somebody will identify or meet a lonely individual and just become friendly, and they will take their time to build this relationship. They will, over the course of weeks or months, they'll build a warm, trusting relationship, and then they'll start asking for money. And you're like, oh, yeah, I really love this person. And of course, I'm going to send them $5,000. And, and then, now I need to have this surgery and I need another $10,000, and pretty soon you may have sent over $100,000, and it's not uncommon that these scammers are so professional and they are patient. They will take however much time it takes to win over a vulnerable person's trust. So again, having somebody to check in on this person to keep them from being lonely. And so that if they've met somebody and they have this newfound friend and they're playing double solitaire online together, and this person will probably tell you about that, right? Well, tell me about your new friend, let's talk about that a little bit. And we just have to be so careful these days.
Yeah, we could go on, Alison, because there are so many examples in so many ways, but I really appreciate your tips that you give. You're so practical. You're so down to earth, including just that last one. If you're listening and you've had this experience or are having this experience that someone may be taking advantage of you, please let somebody else know. It is so common. And you are not the first one. You are likely a very smart person, capable, and it is. I appreciate, Alison, also that you talk about this COVID time because it is so isolating, and it is horrible that there are those out there who are preying on others in that condition, but they are there. And for those who are maybe on the receiving end, to let a family member know, to let maybe your tax accountant know, to let your banker know, anyone that you feel you might have a relationship with. Obviously, if you're in a relationship with Alison and or someone like her or me, we'll be seeing these things possibly, but to just open up the door and let us know, because we will support you in stopping it, and it's not about being wrong. So, Alison, we have to stop. I wish we didn't, but thank you so much for going over approaches to budgeting in 2021 and pivoting and looking past the end of COVID to how things will shift and change. What are the implications following COVID of our expenses, as well as COVID on scammers and those who may prey on others, as well as just the importance of good cybersecurity on our financial systems, because we're all doing things online now. You ask somebody for a check and they look at you blankly. So everything through electronic systems. So thank you so much. And if somebody needs to get a hold of you, Alison, how do they find you?
They can go to our website, which is www.fiscallyfit.us. You can email me directly at Alison, ALISON, at fiscallyfit.us, or you can call our office number, which is 650-965-4090.
Thank you so much, Alison. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, the best is to use the website gatespassadvisors.com. Hit the contact me or just contact button and tell us a bit about what you're looking for, and we'll set up a time to talk. We will, with that, turn it over. I can hear Alison. I think it's at your house. I know you live in Southern Oregon. I think I keep hearing the Canadian geese flying over.
This is such a great microphone. Yes, they are. A whole flock of them just flew right past the window.
So great.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. I wish you the best of the rest of the day. And with that, Eric, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Yeah, those geese sound happy. That's great. Hey, actually, Alison, I did have one question before we wrap this podcast up. What if somebody's listening to this right now and they think they might have a family member that's being taken advantage of? They don't know how to have that conversation, or they're not sure how to approach that, and they'd like some advice. Would you be open to those phone calls as well?
Absolutely. Yes. We really need to feel that there are people on our side that can help us. You know, there's lots of different avenues to take to rectify these situations. And in some cases, not one answer is going to apply to every situation. So reaching out is really super important. Absolutely.
And I think you guys said it best. All three of us are of the generation that we were taught to, give people the benefit of the doubt. And I don't want to necessarily change that. And I don't think you guys do either, but it can be done in such a way that's much safer. So I appreciate both of your time, both of your expertise, and how much you do for your clients. And of course, audience, we appreciate you for tuning in and listening to the Women in Wealth podcast with Esther Sabo. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Esther comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And this is a great one to share, especially if you feel that maybe somebody might be getting taken advantage of, and then you can have a discussion after they listen to it. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Gates Pass Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Women and Wealth podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you receive notifications of new podcasts as they become available. Check out the website at www.gatespassadvisors.com for more information. This content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions expressed and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security.